Hi guys, and welcome to every episode of Family Guy Season 13 Reviewed. I'm back from my little bit of a break, and I'm hoping for a much more enjoyable experience this time than I had with Season 12. I'm not going to waste any time today. I'm just going to get right into the episodes, starting with Season 13, Episode 1, The Simpsons Guy. After Peter creates an offensive comic strip, the family decides to flee the town until things blow over. They end up in Springfield, where they meet the Simpsons family. There were only 4 cutaways to choose from here, and my favourite of them was Peter being offensive to women, because why not? And my best moment was Bart and Stewie's prank calls to Moe. This 40-minute plus special crossover episode gets a 3 out of 5. A lot of people have strong opinions about this one, more negative than positive from what I've seen, but to be honest I'm not particularly opinionated about this. It was of course a bit of a promotion from Fox to get these shows to do a crossover together, and while I do agree, it wasn't that inspiring, for a bit of cheap entertainment it worked fine. I liked the bits at the start of Peter doing this cartoon for a newspaper, only for everyone to get offended by it. Definitely very realistic. I also kind of liked how the Griffins found Springfield. There was no grand entrance or anything. They just kind of rocked up there, letting us feel that Springfield is just this random place in America, even if they're not allowed to give away the exact location, of course. The bits of the different characters hanging out wasn't at all spread out evenly. Marge and Lois hardly got anything to do, and Brian and Chris had a very irrelevant plot where they lose Santa's little helper. Even Lisa trying to install some confidence in Meg was disappointing. It could have had some real impact if it was kept sincere, but no, they had to keep mixing in Peter telling Meg she is worthless. And even Lisa tries to sabotage Meg at one point when she is jealous of how she plays the saxophone. The Bart-Stewie pairing was probably my favourite. The differences between the two shows is shown perfectly by a fun prank call Bart does, in his typical fashion, with the whole clever play on words. Then Stewie has a go, telling Moe that his sister is getting raped. Again, it perfectly showed the contrast of those two characters. The bit where Stewie kidnapped all of Bart's enemies in an attempt to impress him was also weirdly endearing, even if Bart got creeped out by him in the end. Most of the time was of course devoted to Peter and Homer. Much of it was cringy, like the car wash scene of course. But I did like how they played into the rip-off allegations, having the Family Guy characters sitting next to the Simpsons characters, which they're supposedly clones of, in court, was a very nice move. I also liked how Fred Flintstone was the judge, claiming that both shows ripped him off. I personally wouldn't say that Family Guy was like a direct rip-off of The Simpsons. As this episode says, it might have been inspired in some ways by it, but the way the show goes about things is definitely a lot different, and always has been. Of course, things had to wrap up with a giant chicken-like fight in the end between Homer and Peter. It was alright, but maybe got a bit boring after the first few minutes. Obviously, this episode was never going to explore the characters in great detail, or anything like that, but if you take it as just a bit of fun, with a bit of Simpsons fan service mixed in, I can at least accept this episode's existence. P.S. Peter saying, "And now the show is over now," over the Gracie Films logo, I enjoyed more than I probably should have. Season 13, Episode 2, The Book of Joe. Joe becomes a children's book author, but he needs Peter to do the live readings to get people invested. However, Peter and the book's publishers start to take things in the wrong direction. My best cutaway here was Stephen King's ghostwriter, and best moment overall was Joe and his wheelchair slowly moving towards the edge of the stage while reading his book. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This started out with some promise, with the scene at the barbecue party, which had the funny bit of Cleveland washing his feet in the pool, in a not so discreet way. It was also cool to see Joe have this passion project on the go. Him writing this children's book to try and inspire handicapped people was a great idea, and with Peter helping him out by injecting some life into the reading, I thought all of that came together well. It was just a nice moment seeing Joe have a bit of positive success for once. Of course that didn't last long, as Peter and the book publishers got carried away and started twisting the meaning of the book and spreading the wrong message about handicapped people, even openly mocking them. Joe was right to walk away from it all, but the ending was very predictable. I guess it was nice to see Peter fall on his face while trying to write the book himself, but it was obvious he would go back apologizing to Joe, and let's be real, it's hard to take that seriously given the history between the characters. The Brian running subplot was fine. He did become insufferably arrogant as expected, but I did like Stewie saying to him, "Why does everything you touch turn into garbage?" That really does sum Brian up quite well. As far as the jokes here I liked, Stephen King's flamboyant writer was interesting, as was Joe's attempt at miming. But as I said before, the bit of his wheelchair slowly moving towards the kids, scaring them, has got to be the best. It's a joke which, quite literally, creeped up on me. Season 13, Episode 3, Baking Bad. Peter and Lois open a cookie store, but in an attempt to make more profit, Peter slowly starts turning it into a strip club. My best cutaway was Moses parting the sea so a guy can collect seashells. And my best moment was Peter hitting the "I'm so bad" woman with a tray. This one gets a 3 out of 5. Lois and Peter starting a new business together has been done before, and it was obvious that Peter would hijack the project with some form of shenanigans. The subplot of Stewie being drunk was fairly boring also, and I swear that has also been done better before. Still, despite the basic Family Guy formula, I still got some enjoyment out of the main plot. The lack of stakes to the whole thing did let me enjoy the jokes a bit more actually. The names of the girls Peter gets to work at the store are perfect by themselves, especially Butter. Cleveland really loves himself some butter. The scene of Peter smacking the lady in the head was fantastic, perfectly timed. That was the right thing to do, Peter. It really was, Lois. People like that are insufferable in real life, and fair play to the voice actress. She really sold the unlikability of that character. As far as the cutaways here go, Paul Revere taking all the credit while saving his own skin was decent, but I especially like the gag of Moses parting the sea, that skill being used to collect seashells. Hey, tell me a better use of that ability. Overall, there wasn't much substance to this episode story-wise, but it had enough elsewhere to keep me mostly entertained. Season 13, Episode 4, Brian the Closer. Brian becomes a real estate agent. He ends up tricking Quagmire into buying a dump of a property. My best cutaway here was Peter turning off the bubbles in a hot tub, and my best moment was Peter trying to get the rope back off Brian. I gave this one a 1 out of 5. I wanted to try and be a bit more generous, given that I did like the bit at the start, with Peter being obsessed with the precious, that is Brian's rope. Him not wanting to trade the toy fire truck, and the car scene with Brian hanging onto the rope were somewhat entertaining, but as soon as we got into the main plot, things go downhill rapidly. I am frankly done with giving any benefit of the doubt to Brian. Any time from now on he's being an asshole, it's almost a guaranteed 1 rating on the spot, mainly because I'm sick of it. It happens so often. Here, Quagmire actually helps him for once by financing his new set of teeth. How does Brian repay him? Well, by scamming him. he tricks him into buying a crappy house, which is probably illegal, just based on false advertising to be honest. Brian even tries it on again by running the clock down by pretending to be a changed man after Quagmire tracked him down and called him out. Thank God Quagmire smashed him with the pole. That was the least Brian deserved. It doesn't make up for all of Brian's nonsense we had to endure though. The jokes were below par as well for the most part. I didn't find any that funny. But there was a joke about Bonnie planning to kill Joe by pushing him off a cliff, which kind of summed up the dark, negative tone of the episode. Season 13, Episode 5, Turkey Guys. On Thanksgiving morning, Lois discovers Peter and Brian ate the entire turkey planned for dinner. She sends them out to find a replacement, but all the turkeys in town are completely sold out. The best cutaway here was Snoopy's original Happy Dance, and the best moment was Peter saving the turkey instead of Brian. This one gets a 3 out of 5 again. Despite not much actually going on in this episode, there was still enough of the typical Family Guy style entertainment to make this worthwhile. To pick up on what does go on, basically Peter and Brian go shopping for a Thanksgiving turkey, which is very hard to come by, and when they do finally get their hands on one, a guy steals it from them at gunpoint. This sounds exciting and action-packed, but all it actually results in is a lot of wandering around until we reach the rather predictable ending. The one scene from their adventure I did like was Peter rescuing the turkey from the car instead of saving Brian from drowning. His explanation of why he did it, being he thought dogs could breathe underwater, was classic Peter. The thing is, I couldn't tell whether he actually was telling the truth about that or not. I mean, Peter is both malicious and stupid in equal measure, so you never know with him. The scenes we get at the end, where everyone is back at the Griffin's house, were also mixed. The Stewie and Chris stuff was kind of dull. Who cares about Chris being all sophisticated, delivering this speech? I did enjoy Carter and his open-mouthed nap, however, and Lois describing Kevin having sex with his little person girlfriend as chalking a pool cue. That's absolutely outrageous. Some cutaways I also liked was the Y2 gay, that whole bit, and Snoopy's original Happy Dance. Yeah, probably a good job that never made peanuts. Season 13, Episode 6, The 2,000-Year-Old Virgin. After Peter learns Jesus is a virgin, he and the guys try to get him laid for the first time. My best cutaway was the Tasmanian Devil tucking in his children, and my best moment was Peter slipping on ice. This one gets a 2 out of 5. This is not an episode I enjoyed or have much to say about. Everything seemed designed to try and mock and piss off Christians. This is especially sad given how, in his previous appearances, Jesus was a fun enough character. Here he is just a jackass, trying to trick people by lying to them about being a virgin so he can sleep with their wives. In general, there was just a nasty tone to proceedings. That's the only way I can describe it. That same nasty feeling was still there as it pertains to the jokes, with one about a disabled person in a wheelchair being a burden to their family, and another about Peter apparently watching child pornography. Now, I don't expect anything less than shocking or offensive jokes from this show, but these ones weren't particularly clever. In fact, they seem to be in there solely for their bad taste. In terms of the few things I did like here, the Tasmanian Devil tiptoeing around to avoid waking his kid was both funny and kind of sweet, and although slightly drawn out, Peter slipping on ice trying to get to his car was also a decent moment, if only for his running commentary. Season 13, Episode 7, Stewie, Chris and Brian's Excellent Adventure. After learning that Chris is struggling in history class, Stewie and Brian decide to take him for a tour of history in a time machine. My best cutaway was Chris becoming a bus driver that parents don't completely trust. And my best moment overall was the escape from the Titanic. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This was alright. Just having Chris join Brian and Stewie for some time travelling adventures provided some interesting moments by itself. Although I do think they overhyped how dumb Chris is at times. Like, yeah, we all know he's not smart. You don't need to keep trying to sell us on it. Things also ended in a predictable way, with Stewie and Chris making up, despite Chris learning nothing. At least the scenes on the Titanic were interesting to some extent, just because I find the Titanic interesting in general. Another time travel moment I liked was Brian killing Pavlov, the guy who was experimenting on dogs. In terms of the jokes, there was Rupert assuring the other teddy bears that he is in fact straight, and Peter in charge of the Apollo 13 emergency. And as I said, Chris being this creepy bus driver when he gets older definitely captured that creepy vibe very well. Again, not the most consequential story this, but there was enough here to make it watchable. Season 13, Episode 8, Our Idiot Brian. Brian takes a test for Meg and fails. This sends him on a downward spiral, where he starts to join in on Peter's dumb antics. My best cutaway was Peter manning the suicide hotline. And best moment was the montage of Peter and Brian doing stupid things. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. I did enjoy this a lot more than I expected to. Brian getting exposed for not being anywhere near as smart as he thinks he is was a fine yet not entirely original idea. The main reason it worked for me is that it resulted in Peter and Brian just hanging out together having fun. Sometimes that's just nice to see by itself. Who cares what chaos they cause? I did especially like the montage of their wacky antics, with the song Cotton Eye Joe playing in the background. Now the whole brain tumour thing seemed to come out of nowhere, and I'm not sure the ending, where it makes it seem like Brian would be much better off being a moron, was the message we wanted to see. It paints a depressing picture of Brian's life, but whatever. I cared more about the fun than the story anyway. And there was plenty of funny cutaways to help get this to a 4. I liked the jab at how useless Black Widow is to the Avengers, the centipede among millipedes, where he counts up all the legs, but my favourite of all was Peter giving advice for the suicide hotline, the guy telling him he wanted to kill himself because he found his wife was cheating, only for Peter to suggest that maybe he kills her instead. In fairness to Peter, he was hired to keep the caller alive, not anyone else, so he may well have done his job perfectly. Season 13, Episode 9, This Little Piggy. Meg becomes a foot fetish model. Meanwhile, Stewie and Brian visit a folk festival. My best cutaway here also happens to be my favourite moment, which was Boppo, the inflatable punching clown. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. There isn't much to report here. I found the main plot solid enough, which is the main reason this got a 3. Lois and Peter actually get a chance to show that maybe they do care for Meg a little bit by actually showing concern for her, and even saving her in the end from the creepy foot fetish people. It's just rare for Meg and her parents to actually have a nice moment to end on, which happens here. The side plot with Brian and Stewie missed the mark mostly for me, especially the anticlimactic ending where the woman they meet suddenly dies from a drug overdose. It left the whole thing feeling very pointless. In terms of the jokes here, they weren't amazing by any stretch, but Joe being completely oblivious to what they were doing to his foot was alright. as was the claustrophobic turtle. But my favourite was the inflatable balloon, toying with, and then somehow shooting the gangsters, before it turns the gun on itself, finally deflating for good. That is the type of absurdly wacky, nonsensical Family Guy cutaway I always appreciate. Season 13, Episode 10, Quagmire's Mum. With Quagmire facing a statutory rape charge, his mum turns up to try and help him out. The best cutaway here was how Peter reminds Quagmire of his car insurance commercials, and the best moment was Peter trying to abandon Meg, only for his car to crash and blow up. This one gets a 2 out of 5. Finding out more about Quagmire's upbringing was a concept I could get behind, and yes, given the person he is, I am not surprised that his mum was the sexual fiend she was. There's no doubt someone's upbringing can influence the person they turn out to be. However, it's not as set in stone as this episode hints at times. If you have the right people to help you and the right inner mindset, it is possible to be a good person in spite of a bad childhood. So Quagmire is absolutely still responsible for his bad, sometimes illegal behaviour. There were some interesting moments relating to Quagmire and his mum, like how he was born 9 times. That's just wrong on every level. You also have him learning his ABCs by the names of the guys his mum slept with. I did at least find that somewhat funny. The ending, however, was very abrupt, with Quagmire's so-called new Christian mum getting him cleared of his prison sentence by having sex with the judge. Peter summed it up well by saying Quagmire got away with it and didn't learn a thing. Such a satisfying ending, isn't it? In terms of funny moments here, there were a few, like the jazzy animation for Peter's silly car commercial, and the instant karma of Peter trying to abandon Meg. Why do bad things happen to such good people? But for every good moment, there were terrible ones to match. Peter's karaoke phase being the most infamous one. 1 minute and 10 seconds of pure filler. I'm sure they saved a bit of money on the animation though, so good luck to them. Season 13, Episode 11, Encyclopedia Griffin. After someone steals Stewie's trike, Peter and the guys form a detective agency to find it. It turns out that Chris is using the stolen items for a girl doll. That's the best way I can describe that thing. In terms of the best cutaway here, there were 2 I really liked and I couldn't really separate them, so they get the joint honour as my favourite. They were Chris's hamster dance, Tourette syndrome, and Joe's creative voicemail message. The thing I liked best overall was just Peter and the guys trying to find the stolen items. I personally gave this one a 4 out of 5. Honestly, I would not blame you for rating this one way lower, but it got by for me on a number of silly yet Family Guy style gags. I didn't care about Chris having this homemade girlfriend / sex doll. That is exactly the type of behaviour we have come to expect from Chris, and nothing came of it in the end. Equally, the marriage squabbling between Peter and Lois, I couldn't bring myself to care about. Frankly, I don't know how anyone could, especially given how Peter just takes a knee for the ending, just to ram home how meaningless it was. Let's move on to something I am actually excited to talk about. There were numerous jokes here I liked. Most of the bits of the guys trying to catch the criminal worked, like Peter being tricked by the kid with the bubblegum machine. And of course, Mayor West fell for it too. I really hope that kid isn't actually banging their wives though. Quagmire on the kid's hidden camera is also typical Quagmire behaviour. The cutaways were also great. You have Huey Lewis and the Jews, the secret level of Donkey Kong, Peter teaching old Asians how to get on the subway. But as I said, there were 2 clear favourites for me. Chris's hamster dance Tourette's just worked so well. Chris is the perfect candidate for this type of gag. His brain ain't right, but it's fun. Joe singing to the tune of Your Love by The Outfield was a classic. Peter may be annoyed by it, but the lyrics actually fit very well, and the extra lyrics he came up with were very appropriate. So good job, Joe. Season 13, Episode 12. Stewie is on Sant. Stewie feels that he and Brian are drifting apart, so he creates a machine that takes a sample of Brian's DNA to make him pregnant. Yep, that is actually a plot which happened on the old Family Guy. There was only one real moment I liked here, and it happened to be a cutaway, which was Stewie declares that he and Brian are inseparable, like Jack and Jill. The only reason I somewhat like that gag is just how much of an asshole Jack was being to Jill. He made damn sure he wasn't going to be the butt of the joke this time. It's probably no surprise this gets a 1 out of 5. The premise here is both stupid and disgusting in equal measure. The first half is them toying around with the idea of Stewie getting pregnant, and the second is Stewie actually having the babies. For such an over-the-top story, it's actually remarkable how little actually happens here. Most of the time is spent having Stewie act like a jealous ex towards Brian, and his actions of doing all of this without telling Brian are of course completely unacceptable. Of course, the scene where Stewie has to give birth is as disgusting as possible. Honestly, I feel weird even saying that, but hey, welcome to Family Guy, I guess. And the babies are, you guessed it, all deformed messes, which are kind of half dog, half human. I mean, what can I even analyse here? It's clearly designed to be as gross, and frankly as bad as possible. I struggle to imagine anyone sitting there thinking, yeah, this is gonna be a great piece of television. If someone actually thought that, then I admire their optimism. That's all I can say. There was also a half-baked subplot here of Peter and the guys trying to go viral on the internet, but there was nothing of substance there, certainly nothing good. To cement this episode as quite a low 1, I did not find it at all funny. Season 13, Episode 13, Dr. C and the Woman. Cleveland becomes a therapist, and Meg takes a job with the TSA at the airport. My best cutaway was Peter getting Lois to keep track of all the words he knows, and best moment was Peter buying beer and drugs for the teenagers, then ending up in court. This one gets, say, 3 out of 5. This was alright, nothing special, but it had a few of the silly Family Guy style jokes, which were somewhat funny, like the silly arguments between Joe and Quagmire about the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans at the start, and Peter listing out all the words he knows for a disgruntled Lois. I also liked the bit of Peter and Lois playing golf. Peter throwing his bag further than his ball went was pretty funny, but also kind of relatable for anyone who's played golf. Golf be a hard game to play consistently, but my favourite of all was Peter being pressured by the teenagers to buy them beer and weed. All they needed to say was, "I thought you were cool." The punchline where Peter is in court and the judge gets him to admit doing it by peer pressuring him in the same way was chef's kiss. As far as the actual plots, they were very mid. Cleveland being this unlicensed therapist was interesting at the start, especially the bits with Mayor West, but it developed into some Peter and Lois drama, which felt very stale. The Meg subplot also seemed pointless. She never seemed to develop a genuine connection with the airport workers, and gets fired in the end. So not sure what was accomplished there. Still, given the above average jokes, this leveled off to being an average episode overall. Season 13, Episode 14, Jolo. The guys take a road trip to Niagara Falls. While there, Joe tries to commit suicide by jumping into the falls. My best cutaway was the Griffin family being easily won over by a good ad campaign, and my best moment was Joe saving the guys from drowning. This one gets a 4 out of 5. Given the serious nature of Joe trying to kill himself, this could have gone terribly. You may even expect it to, given Family Guy's recent history of dealing with dark or serious issues. This one for the most part worked for me though. The bits at the start, with Peter accidentally finding this missing kid, leading to him becoming a hero, was fine. Quagmire questioning how Peter was holding the kid is what stood out to me. But Joe getting depressed because he felt constantly reminded of what he couldn't do and how he couldn't be a hero, or at least he felt he couldn't be a hero due to his handicap, was quite realistic and hard-hitting. He even goes wild for a bit in an attempt to have a fun time before he ends his life at Niagara Falls. Now of course, the way he did it by jumping and getting caught on a branch, not only once but twice, was not overly serious, but they didn't need to have an overly dark tone to get the message across. In the end, Joe does find his inner strength and does become the hero he didn't think he was capable of being by saving the guys in this crazy action sequence. While a bit wacky, I still thought it was well done and presented, and resulted in a rare feel-good ending for the show. The jokes here I also found funny. The ad campaign at the start was great, with how excited the family got over the McRib. Peter and Meg even put all of their differences aside. The past doesn't matter, only the McRib matters. The cutaway of Peter playing the maracas and wondering about babies' bones being in them was also exactly the type of insane inner madness and ramblings we expect of his brain. So yeah, this episode ended up being very enjoyable, perhaps surprisingly so. Season 13, Episode 15, Once Bitten. After Brian bites Peter, he gets sent to obedience school. Meanwhile, Neil cozies up to Chris in an attempt to get closer to Meg. My best cutaway here was, Brian feels more powerful than a lesbian's crutch. She can valet that bike all by herself, right into the restaurant. And my best moment was Neil playing the radio for Chris outside the window. This one gets a 2 out of 5. Maybe it's my annoyance at Brian talking, but this episode felt annoying to me. Peter is actually trying to help Brian by giving him a pill the vet said he needs, so Brian biting him over it was not the best look. Maybe you can excuse it because he really doesn't want it to get shoved up his bum, but one thing you definitely can't excuse is Brian being a dick to Peter afterwards, and essentially trying to take over the whole house. It's his douchiness on full display yet again. The bits where he goes to obedience school and got overcorrected, so to speak, were decent I suppose, but still lacked many funny moments. And it was obvious how things would play out in the end. The subplot had Neil and Chris forming a friendship, a fake one, because Neil wanted access to Meg, but he does try and make amends with Chris in a moment which worked for me, because he could only figure out how to play the radio. In general, this side plot felt like it came right out of the first 2 seasons. It did feel a bit odd to be going back to Neil crashing on Meg. Overall, this episode was not as funny as I'd have liked, so that, along with being bored of Brian's nonsense, is why I gave this a 2. Season 13, Episode 16, Roasted Guy. Peter's feelings get hurt when his friends roast him. It leads to him abandoning them and hanging out with women instead. My best cutaway here was also by far my standout moment, and it was the Nasty Wolf Pack. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. Again, I found this annoying most of the time. I said when The Simpsons tried this roast thing that I'm not a fan of the format, and my opinion hasn't changed. Here, it makes even less sense, because Peter somehow gets his feelings hurt by the roast session, despite the fact that he was the one who asked for it. It makes no sense, really, outside of Peter just being an idiot, that is. The rest of the episode was spent with Peter hanging out with a bunch of passive-aggressive lady friends who love to talk crap about people behind their back. Now, there may well be some truth to that stereotype, but it's still not a fun thing to watch, and the ending makes the story even more pointless. because Peter's friends never even noticed that he was mad at them, and accepted him back no problem. All a waste of time. At least I found a few of the cutaways funny, like Peter going full Rambo mode on the guy that stole his lunch, because his name was Peter too. But my favourite was the lengthy one, about the wolf pack. At first it's a little mean prank, tricking him into yelling cock-a-doodle-doo, but the wolf's life totally spirals out of control, and the whole thing ends in both the darkest yet silliest way possible. It's a pretty memorable cutaway to me. Season 13, Episode 17, Fighting Irish. Peter keeps bragging that he can beat Liam Neeson in a fight, but when he goes to challenge him, he finds out he bit off more than he can chew. My best cutaway was the woodchuck who wants to be a doctor being embarrassed by his dad. And my best moment was Peter dressed as Mrs. Potato Head, attracting Colin Farrell. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This was okay. It obviously tried to get the most out of the guest appearance by Liam Neeson, and they certainly played up to his tough guy image here. He's almost immune to any kind of physical damage, it seems. Certainly any damage Peter is capable of dishing out anyway, as shown by the rather one-sided fight between them at the end. Still, the whole premise did produce a few funny moments, like the whole Mrs. Potato Head fiasco, and the amusing fake confession booth. Just wasn't as memorable or impactful as I'd have liked overall. The subplot felt a little fillery, but it was fine for what it was. I totally understand Stewie getting jealous that Lois is bonding with another baby. In terms of the jokes, this was again about average. I liked Peter shouting about how he could beat up Liam Neeson during the opera, and the woodchuck test is a classic. The dad is kind of right. A woodchuck doctor curing disease doesn't quite have the same ring to it. Season 13, Episode 18, Take My Wife. Peter, Lois and all their friends go to a marriage counselling program in the Bahamas. My best cutaway was the Owl vs Hornet War, and best moment overall was Quagmire's response to being asked about Kimmy's eyes. The season finale gets a 3 out of 5. On the face of it, this doesn't feel original. There have been plenty of times where Peter and Lois try to fix their marriage by way of some intervention or program. At least this time they added some different elements into the mix by making Cleveland, Joe and Quagmire go with their partners as well. Well, I say partners, in Quagmire's case, it was some bimbo he met online. Still, it was for the best, when Quagmire quickly replied, shaved. When asked about Kimmy's eye colour, that got a laugh out of me. Now there was some mild intrigue when their guide supposedly gets shot and they are all held captive. Seeing how they all come together in what they think will be their last moments was kind of nice. Still, it was fairly obvious it was all a part of the plan, so I knew exactly how the ending would play out. That lessens the impact a little bit. What else is there to talk about here? Oh yeah, the cutaway again. I like the premise of this Owl vs Hornet war, and I even kind of like the screw the audience moment, where Peter informs us that the war would be expensive to animate, so they show stock footage of an old plane trying to take off instead. Overall, this was a very acceptable end to the season. So, with all the episodes done, welcome to my Season 13 summary. In terms of the stats, the overall season average score was 2.72, which is comfortably better than last season, but it's still not good. In fact, it's still bad. In terms of my top and bottom 5 episodes, it was really tough to compile them this time. If you look at the chart there, half the episodes this season were just mid-3 rated episodes, and there were hardly any good episodes to choose from. But in the end, I went like this. My bottom 5 were Roasted Guy at 5, Quagmire's Mum at 4, The 2000-Year-Old Virgin at 3, Brian the Closer at 2, Stewie is Enceinte as by far the worst. For my top 5, I put The Simpsons Guy at 5, and the fact that that episode is at 5 kind of tells you all you need to know about the quality of these episodes. I only put it there because at least it's somewhat memorable, more so than most of these episodes anyway. At number 4 I had Take My Wife, at 3 I had Our Idiot Brian, at 2 there is Encyclopedia Griffin, and Jolo was my favourite of the season. So this season was better than 12, that's about the best thing I can say about it. Thankfully we were spared from the absolute worst episodes here, apart from the number 1 pick maybe, but the best episodes here were again very weak. None of them even sniffed a 5. In fact, In Harmony's Way from last season was more enjoyable than anything here. Still, the tone was a bit more forgiving, none of the characters were egregiously bad. I mean, they all had their bad moments, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't on as consistent a basis as it was last season. This just felt like a modern style Family Guy season through and through, which isn't great and doesn't leave me feeling excited about the future of the show, but hey, the show is what it is at this point. Regardless, I sure hope all of you enjoyed this video, or at least got something out of it. Please share your thoughts in the comments as always, because for now, I'm done. Take care guys.